So I'm going to be basically sharing my own experience in terms of my journey of researching in environmental issues and environmental law, basically. And for me, I've always shared the idea that environmental issues and environmental law or environmental rights, as it's were, as important as the whole concept of human rights, particularly as it affects Africa. So what I'm doing today is to sort of show how far I've gone in terms of my research in environmental rights and environmental issues with a focus on Africa. Okay, so just a bit of my background. I'm a lawyer. I studied law at Madina University in Nigeria, and I've also practiced law for a period of 2 years, even though I've been called to the Nigeria bar for about 10 years. This is my 10th year as a lawyer in Nigeria since when I was called. And I've also have a master's degree in oil and gas law and policy from the University of Aberdeen, where I took some modules on principles of environmental regulations from the aspects of the oil and gas industry and their impact on the environment. I'm currently a doctoral researcher at the University of Essex, and I'm being supervised by Professor Kaimi. And my research interests, some of the areas that I currently work on, international energy law and policy, environmental law, and I'm also going into contract law at the moment because that's what I teach at the University College here in Essex. I'm also looking at the intersections between human and environmental rights and energy access development in Africa. How the development of energy access in Africa affects human and environmental rights, even though we all agree that energy access development is quite important to the economic development of Africa. And I'm also working on energy justice. That's part of my research interest, energy justice, the concept and its framework and how it applies to countries in the global south, of course, with a focus on African countries. And then my current research at the moment explores the energy justice concept, framework and concept and the principles that are derived from it. Specifically, I'm looking at how it could be applied to countries in the global south to address justice issues arising from energy systems. Okay, so for this presentation, like I said, it's about my own research on how I have been able to find my voice within environmental law scholarship, particularly as it relates to Africa. So the outline, just a brief outline, I'm going to talk a little bit about environmental governance and regulation, just a broad overview, and how it has been able to help shape my ideas in terms of my research in environmental law and environmental protection in Africa. And then I'm also going to look at, talk briefly about the research methodology that I've adopted in the past to frame my ideas, my analysis, my arguments, and of course, my conclusions in environmental scholarship. And in doing that, I want to start with the basis, understanding the basis, talking about the concept of environment and environmental rights. And then I would move to the act of protecting the environment through the use of international instruments and some domestic laws in certain African countries. And then I'll look at the challenges in terms of applying those laws, those instruments to protect the environment in Africa. There are aspects where we have some institutional challenges, and then there are aspects where we have enforcement challenges with respect to enforcing those particular laws. And then, of course, this one is quite important, the challenge of divergent interest amongst international players and domestic players as well. Even at the international level, international communities, there are lots of divergent interests that has hindered the protection of the environment in Africa. And then I would then, talk a little bit about some of my conclusions from what I've done in the past in environmental scholarship. Okay, so just a bit of a overview of environmental governance and regulation. So basically, for me, like I did mention, these have formed my ideas, helped shape my ideas in terms of the research that I have carried out in environmental protection rights in Africa. And when we talk about environmental governance and regulation, basically it deals with strict environmental protection through environmental laws that have been set out to provide the general legal framework for the regulation and protection of elements of the environment. And this would include the laws, rules, guidelines, and regulations. And of course, how the institutions that have been set up, or the players that these laws are meant to regulate, how the compliance level that has been seen in terms of all of this regulation. It could also mean understanding of environmental laws and regulations for better environmental protection and management. And these, of course, include compliance level. So a whole, putting this together would bring about environmental governance and regulations generally. But there are some difficult questions, that arise from, the whole overview of environmental regulation and governance, particularly as it relates to Africa. Do these body of rules, laws, regulations, policies, and guidelines, do they really work? And to what extent can we conclude that the general legal framework for environmental protection has contributed actually to the protection of the environment at both the international and domestic levels? That is a question. Those are questions that, if we were to find answers to them, then we have to look at, on a case-by-case basis on different countries. And, your guess is as good as mine when we're talking about the environment, particularly if you look at what is going on with the whole climate change issue. So that tells a lot about the current environmental legal framework, not just in Africa, but including countries in the global north. Okay, and then my methodology, or some of the methodologies that I've used in the past in terms of my research. Of course, the most popular one, which are most lawyers or people who are into law research, and we tend to use more of the doctrinal research methodology to help situate our voice and our analysis and arguments, where we try to do some sort of legal or make some legal analysis, analyzing laws, rules with respect to that particular issue or area that we are carrying out the research. And I've also done a bit of comparative research, used comparative research methodology in my works as well, under environmental rights protection, where I looked at, there was a paper that I looked at, between, I compared Nigeria and India in terms of the enforcement of environmental protection rights as provided in the Constitution. And there's also the methodology of, where we use case study research. I've also done a bit of work in that area in one of my papers, where I focused on a particular jurisdiction, which is Nigeria. And for obvious reasons, I have done that probably because I'm from Nigeria. And then there is field research. I have never been involved in any of the field research, mostly used by the social scientists, where they go into the field and they come up with different studies or data that have been used to analyze environmental issues. It's quite interesting because when they do that, it's really helpful for those of us who do library-based research or who use those of us that use the doctrinal research, because we tend to get more current information from field research. And then there is the normative and evaluative research methods, which sort of blends into the doctrinal and case study research. And basically that means evaluating and assessing the applicable standard of environmental protection in a specific jurisdiction to determine the extent to which it meets international best practices. We see that often, when you're doing a case study research, you're trying to assess the current environmental standard in that particular jurisdiction with a view to determine whether it meets international best practices. Okay, moving on. So, like I did mention, understanding the basis, understanding the foundation of the whole concept of the environment and environmental right has really helped in shaping my research, and has helped in terms of how I've been able to frame my ideas around what I've done in environmental law scholarship. So for me, I've always looked at the environment, and I discovered that it has been defined from two different perspectives. One has to do with the ecocentric perspective, which focuses more on the environment, and the other has to do with, from a human rights perspective, trying to protect human rights to the environment. And I find the definition provided by Albert Einstein quite interesting for me, where he talked about the environment being everything else that isn't himself. The environment is everything that isn't me. That's according to Albert Einstein. And from the United Nations Environmental Protection, UNEP, they define the environment as the sum of all external conditions affecting the life, development, and survival of an organism. So obviously, the UNEP looked at the environment, or defined the environment, particularly from the ecocentric perspective, because it relates more to them, it relates more to the protection of the environment. And for the World Health Organization, for obvious reasons, you will see that this definition, it's more from a human rights perspective. They define the environment as all the physical, chemical, and biological factors external to a person, and all the related behaviors between these elements. That's for the World Health Organization, talking about the environment from human rights perspective. And then coming down to the domestic level, you can see that for Nigeria, so this is a domestic legislation that then to provide environmental protection, that is responsible for environmental protection in Nigeria. It's a body that is responsible for environmental protection in Nigeria. And under Section 36 of the NESRA Act, that's the National Environmental Standards and Regulations Enforcement Agency, they looked at the environment, their own definition of the environment, that it means water, air, land, and all plants and human beings or animals living therein, and the interrelationships which exist among these or any of them. So this is, like I said, it's a domestic legislation that tries to pick or tries to understand all of the other definitions, and then was able to come up with their own definition, also fusing together the ecocentric and the human right aspect of the environment. And for Damilola Olawi, who's also an environmental scholar, he tried to he obviously did a brilliant job in terms of fusing the ecocentric aspect of environmental protection and from the human right perspective together, stating that it's defined as the sum total of water, air, land, plants, animals, humans, and other living organisms that make up the ecosystems. And he went further to say that that's the cross-cutting interactions between all of these participants. For him, that sort of captures the ecocentric perspective of the environment and the human rights aspect of the environment. Now, in terms of defining environmental rights, my understanding has always been from that environmental right is founded on the principles of environmental law. So these has really helped in terms of my work, my research that I've done over the years in environmental scholarship, understanding the basis that the establishment of environmental right is based and linked to the principles of environmental law. And for Tim Hayward, he stated that in defining environmental rights, and it deals with rights that accrue to individuals as regards the environment. All of the rights that humans have regarding the environment, the right to use the environment, the right to ensure that the environment that we live in is healthy, is safe, and does not sort of accumulate any dangers for humans. And for Lawrence Asebua, who is also another environmental scholar from my country, Nigeria, he defined environmental right as the right of every human being to the protection and conservation of his or her environment, free from the degrading effects of pollution and other human activities. So all of these have helped a lot in helping me to sort of find my own voice in my research and the works that I've done in environmental law scholarship in Africa. Because you need to understand some of these foundations in order for you to make arguments, to analyze some of these issues and how you draw your own conclusions. So in terms of the act of protecting the environment, the act of environmental protection, I've looked at this from, like I did mention, the relevant rules, the relevant instruments and domestic laws that are applicable in various countries and at the international level for the protection of the environment. For obvious reasons, again, I decided to start with the African Charter on Human and People's Rights because, of course, we're talking about key issues in African law systems. One of the most important instruments that we often refer to when we're talking about environmental and human rights in Africa, we're referring to we make reference to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which is the first regional human rights instrument in the world to expressly provide for environmental rights in the world. And under Article 24, it says that all people shall have the right to a generally satisfactory environment that is favorable to our own development. So these particular instrument has sort of helped a lot of the states in Africa, from Nigeria to Kenya to Zimbabwe to South Africa, Rwanda, and even Nigeria, to help sort of introduce or incorporate environmental rights protection in their various constitutions. And at the international level, you have the Stockholm Declaration, which was the first global conference to make the environment a major issue. And that was followed in 1992 by the Rio Declaration. Again, it was also considered to be the second global conference on the environment. So I've had to look at these instruments, the laws, particularly when I'm dealing with any of the jurisdiction, Kenya, Zimbabwe, South Africa, to be able to look at how far they have gone in terms of the act of protecting the environment. For the international level, I've made reference to these particular instruments that have some foundations in terms of environmental protection. Okay, so what are the institutional challenges, or what are the challenges that we often encounter when it comes to environmental protection? And this is not just in Africa, but including countries in the global north. But I'm making a particular reference to or focus to Africa in this presentation. So for the institutional challenges, the top on the list, it has always been the regulatory bodies and the issue of regulatory capture. This often plays out in most of the major industries, like oil and gas industries, which of course their operations have some sort of huge impact on the environment. So there's always the issue of regulatory capture because of the fact that the regulatory bodies, for example, the one we have in Nigeria, the NEXRA, National Environmental Standards and Regulation Enforcement Agencies, to an extent, relies on the players in the industries to be able to carry out their job, and that's not a good practice. So it's a problem, it's an institutional problem that has hindered environmental protection, not just in Nigeria, but in many African countries. And then there is the issue of underfunding of the regulatory bodies. To me, I mean, it seems to be an Afrocentric problem, something that is constant in Africa. There's always the issue of underfunding of the regulatory bodies. And frankly, that is why they rely so much on the players in the industry to be able to carry out their job. And then there is the issue of lack of technical know-how. Which, I mean, some people would argue that, I mean, there has been a lot of work that has been carried out in that area to see how they can upscale in that regard. But to date, up until today, we still have issues that has to do with technical know-how on how they should carry out their responsibilities in terms of the protection of the environment. And then lastly, funny one, but it's true, lack of political will on the part of the government. And this is because of the issue of, the whole paradox of wanting to carry out more, economic development, or to carry out more production, exploration of economic resources for economic development, and at the same time trying to protect the environment. That hasn't worked well for many African countries. And as such, they find, they see it as a way to stifle economic development, to economic growth and prosperity. And as such, they don't pay so much attention to some of the operations from the various industries that affect the environment. What are the enforcement challenges that I've also, come across in my work? The first on the list there is the divergent interest between international and domestic players. They tend to give different and confusing interpretations to environmental protection and management, especially where their interest is at stake. Then they, sort of switch side in terms of how they interpret these instruments, how they interpret even their own domestic laws for the protection of the environment. And the problem is that when the interests of the parties are not aligning, then it becomes a problem even at the global level. Because when it matters, that is when, or when it's suited, that's when they talk about, environmental protection. So take for example, we see that, the last president, the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, where he pulled out of the Paris agreement, that it doesn't really suit or fit what he intends to do with, while he was in power. And that goes to tell us how there are divergent interests in terms of the protection of the environment. And then there's also the issue of lack of binding obligations, particularly as it relates to the international instruments, which are often considered to be soft laws instruments at the international levels, even at the domestic levels where you have guidelines for environmental protection. So, I mean, I don't understand how you would issue guidelines for environmental protection and then you expect such documents to be binding on the players. There is a reason why it is called guidelines. And then you have also the issue of the nature of the sanctions This is what we see in many of the domestic legislations that we find in Africa. And that has not really helped in terms of the protection of the environment. You see poor sanctions that fail to deter the players in that particular industries where the operation affects or have huge impact on the environment. And of course, the biggest challenge that I have, encountered or have, come to discover in my work has been the paradox of economic growth and environmental protection, trying to increase economic growth through the development of economic resources, and at the same time trying to protect the environment. It tends to be a huge conflict that plays out there in the quest for economic development on the one hand and protection of the environment on the other hand. Okay, so these are my some of the papers that I have been able to produce with some of my colleagues together, that we've worked on together, that sort of situate all of the, the discussions that I have just talked about in these presentations, using the different methods, methodologies in the past to work on these papers. Done one on Nigeria, specifically a case study, and then actually these two are case studies on Nigeria, and then there's this one of where I did a comparative analysis between Nigeria and India in terms of the enforcement of constitutional and environmental rights in court. And what are my conclusions so far from what I have done in the past in terms of my research in environmental law scholarship? So I've come to the conclusion that there is need to beef up regulations. Now, the problem that we have in most African countries in terms of the regulations, it's not the lack of regulations. I mean, there are so many regulations, there are so many domestic laws that have been set out to protect the environment. But the problem is that, they are reactive, or they operate in a reactive way rather than being proactive. And also, I've come to a conclusion that there's need to demonstrate clear policy for strengthening the environmental regulatory framework, especially at the international level. This means that there is need for interest to be aligned, and that would help in terms of the protection of the environment. And also, there's also a need to strike a balance, talking about the paradox that I mentioned in the previous slide, trying to protect the environment on one hand, and also trying to increase the development of economic resources for economic growth and development. So in striking that balance, some scholars have argued, which I agree with them, like Damilola, that there's need to mainstream or to integrate environmental rights and protection into planning and execution of environmental projects, and also all of the operations that impact the environment. Now, some people may argue that, what's the need for the environmental impact assessment? Well, I don't know how much that has done or how much that has contributed to environmental protections, particularly if you look at Nigeria's Niger Delta region and what is going on there in terms of the environmental degradation. And lastly, there's also the need to strengthen institutions, the regulatory and judicial bodies that are in charge of implementing or applying these laws, the domestic laws and rules, to avoid issues of regulatory capture, for example, that I talked about earlier. So these are, some of the works I've been able to carry out in terms of environmental law protection and environmental rights in Africa. And this brings my journey to an end. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for presenting. I have to switch my view. All right. I don't know if you would like or Toko would like to moderate questions, or if I should assist.
I mean, you can go, Prof. You can go ahead.
No, it's fine. I'll jump in during the questions, but Marie, please, you can moderate. That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Are there any so far? And I think that can be also very helpful for you that are in the process of also writing a seminar paper soon. Cecilia, I see that your hand is up.
Yeah, it's up. Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you, Godswill, for your presentation. I'm not sure if what I have is a question or an addition to what you have presented. I was wondering whether throughout your research on environmental issues in Africa, you have ever came across the concept of environmental rights, whether you have encountered it as the question of people's rights rather than individual rights. Because if you look at the Article 24 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, that article falls amongst the 5 or 4 articles that are termed as people's rights under the Charter. So, of course, I am not negating the fact that environmental rights can be pursued by individuals, but you may also need to look at this particular aspect from the perspective of people's rights, maybe drawing examples from the Ogoni case, whether you have ever came across it. It was determined by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Actually, it's from Nigeria. You may be interested in looking at it. And in such particular case, the rights to environment was determined from the people's rights perspective, not individual, not as the right belonging to an individual. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. For me, obviously, I mean, I am very much familiar with that case. In fact, it's one of the case studies that we also looked at in one of the papers that I shared earlier in my presentation. And I don't think, personally that, there is any difference. And the reason why you would find that it's being challenged, or people, who bring actions on environmental rights collectively, it's because it's not an easy thing for an individual to be able to challenge the companies in these industries. It takes a whole lot to be able to challenge the companies, and that is why you find that most of these actions have been brought collectively, like what happened, recently in some of the judgments that have been delivered, even in the Netherlands against Shell petroleum companies. So in terms of that, there is a link in between human rights and environmental rights, and bringing the action doesn't really matter whether it has to be an individual right or it has to be people's right. The reason why a collection of people would go for it is because it's much easier for them to be able to bring such an action as a colleague under some sort of a group or organization, rather than an individual challenging those companies.
Okay, maybe to add, I may ask then whether, in your perspective, you may consider an incident where environmental rights can be held by a group, just not as an individual. Is it a possible incident?
Yeah, absolutely, it is possible. There is a group that is called SERAC in Nigeria that has always taken the lead when it comes to trying to enforce environmental rights or bringing up actions in court against government, against multinational companies, against industry players, that their operations affect the environment. I think CRAP is not just in Nigeria as well. I'm not too sure about that, but they often take the lead when it comes to bringing up actions on behalf of communities, on behalf of group of people, to ensure that the environment is being protected, particularly in the Niger Delta region of Nigeria.
Oh, thank you.
Can I just quickly jump in before you invite the next set of questions? And it's to add to what Godswill just explained about this relationship between individual rights and group rights. Now, from a legal strategic viewpoint, one must approach this right to a healthy environment according to the needs of a particular case. And as an environmental lawyer, my purpose is always the same, and this is to make sure that we achieve the best possible environmental outcome. Okay, now in arguing for individual rights and their recognition within the constitutional models of protection, the argumentation is both normatively but also substantively different when you consider group rights. And this is because of the consequences on the state in relation to what it has to do in order to achieve that. Individual rights, it's possible to point to a particular claimant and to make sure that measures are done to fulfill the protection of that individual's rights. When the class of claimants is more dispersed, maybe a community, you mentioned the CIRAC case, which I think is a seminal case in international law, not just in the African human rights system, but international law in relation to how you protect individual, how you protect group rights relating to the environment. It also means that the scope of obligations and the actions that the government now needs to take becomes a bit more dispersed as well. So in making a decision whether you're going to pursue this as an individual right or a group right, these consequences have to be borne in mind. It is not surprising, at least to me, that some elements of the CIRAC case, things that the Nigerian government was obligated to do by this judgment, are still to be implemented. And this speaks to the dispersed nature of the recommendations, some which could be considered immediate, but some would require time because they require changing policies in the management of oil and gas resources, but also remediation of the consequential damage to the development of these resources. And so as a lawyer, one has to have these differences in mind when pursuing these cases. Individual rights, quick wins, but might have limited focus. When you go for group rights, this will likely take time, but the changes might be more sustainable in the long term. Okay.
Thanks for this explanation. All right, I see Jabi's hand is up.
Yeah, thank you for your contribution. It was very useful, especially for people like me who do not specialize in environmental law. So thank you very much for the insightful presentation. So when I come to your presentation, I have noted that you gave a very broad definition of the environment. You gave the legal framework that provides for the environment. And in fact, here you dealt with the international perspective from the African Charter, and you touched here and there from the domestic or national legal frameworks of different countries. And then you dealt with the institutional challenges, and you talked about the challenges, the institutional challenges, the enforcement challenges. You went to the conclusion and solutions, and you provided for the solutions. But then I had this problem. I'm not sure if I was left out of the discussion, or maybe I did not very well understand. But from your presentation, I understood that you're trying to research on the research question as to whether the general body of environmental laws or regulations are working in ensuring that there's environmental protection, right? That's the research question. And as a researcher, my understanding is that when you're dealing with your work, you have to come from the general perspective into a more specialized or into a more specialized scope. So I could see that you were touching from different, different problems that are involved in environmental law. But my question was, what exactly is your research question? Probably I didn't get that. I didn't exactly get that. What exactly is your research question? In other words, I would say, I would wish that you would actually particularize, or at least briefly tell us what exactly is your research problem, your problem. Yeah. Yeah, because I could see a lot of, you were talking of a lot of challenges in environmental law, but what actually are you dealing with? Yeah, so that's my question. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, JB. So, I mean, if you looked at the nature and the title of the presentation, you know, what I was asked to do is to sort of share my own experience in terms of the research work that I have carried out in environmental scholarship. So in all of these works that I have done, you know, some of the papers that I shared in the presentation, obviously there has been a research questions or research statement in those papers. So what I've done today is to share some sort of a journey of my research, of how I've framed my own ideas. I've been able to find my own voice within the environmental law scholarship as it relates to Africa. So it doesn't really border on any particular, you know, overarching research question, but just to share my experience in environmental law scholarship as it relates to Africa.
Okay, I understand. I actually thought you were trying to tell us what you're doing with your current research work.
No, it's more of the work that I've done in the past.
Okay, yeah. All right.
Okay, do we have more questions for Godswill? And I would like to ask you to all put on your videos. Mind that that's just much more respectful for all participants of the discussion. I see Isabel's hand up. Toko, would you like to say something?
Oh, I see Isabel. Okay, fine. I speak with Godswill all the time, and there's some debates perhaps that I think we should talk about in this forum. But I'll give the floor to Isabel. And just the note about the videos, I think, you know, your presenters do deserve your presence, you know, to be able to see your reactions to what they're saying and all of that, and unless there is a very good reason not to show your face, then I would insist that you do this, because they've taken so much effort to share with you this morning, and I think this is the minimum requirement. Isabel, please go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, first, thank you for your presentation. Sorry. I have a question which is probably a bit practical, since you also gave us insight on how you did your research. So some of us in this forum are now starting their own research, and others also plan maybe the PhDs to write an additional paper and something. So I wanted to know whether you could give us some insights on how you always start new research. So you highlighted that you wrote articles already besides your PhD. Could you take us on your journey, how you always do that, and maybe give some small tips?
Okay, thank you very much, Isabel. I'm going to start off, on the point that Prof made regarding, when looking at these materials, and it's important for us not to just look at them at face value, and try to, it's important for us not to just assimilate what has already been produced and then trying to reproduce those works. So what I do for me is to try to question the current narrative, or try to question some of the areas that I'm looking at, framing my own ideas from a very critical point of view, and then that helps to form specific research questions on that particular paper or whatever it is and that I'm working on. And then again, I also as much try to expand my ideas, especially if I'm looking at different jurisdictions. So that really helps me again to, sort of bring in my voice to the narratives whenever I carry out or I'm conducting a particular research. And one of the things that I have been trying to do in my work at the moment, my current research, that's my PhD at the moment, which of course Prof would allude to, that we've always had certain debates. It's to be able to find my own voice. That's one of the things that Prof has always complained about in my work, that he wants to be able to hear my voice. So it's important for us to start thinking from the moment we pick up those materials to read, from the moment we pick up different materials to read on any area that we're trying to come up with, trying to do some work on, or to research on, to start thinking of how you can get your voice held in that particular work that you're doing at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Freda, I see your hand up.
I needed some time to think about it, and I'm not really sure how to phrase it yet, but you mentioned the paradox between the economic growth and environmental preservation. And Toko, you also mentioned that we have to keep in mind the best environmental outcome. And I was wondering whether that meant the best outcome for the environment, or whether it meant how much of the environment we can use for human purposes without fostering environmental degradation. And I wanted to ask you how you can address that in your research, and what your perspective is on that. So how maybe your definition of the environment, and how you try to cope with this paradox.
Okay, thank you very much, Frida. So one of the things I've done in terms of my research, like I mentioned in my conclusion, has to do with the idea of, trying to strike a balance. It's quite difficult, and it could be very challenging for particularly African countries to be able to do that, because of the fact that we have always had this idea that the moment you start to harness economic resources, that's a card to economic growth, or a gateway to out of economic poverty and all of that. So it's important that they try as much as possible to strike a balance, in resolving the conflict, in resolving the paradox of wanting to increase economic growth through the development of economic resources, and also at the same time trying to protect the environment. So one of the things I've done is to keep, re-echoing the voice of some scholars, because it's important, in mainstreaming, or at the stage where this process is being carried out, the very foundation, to integrate or mainstream environmental rights, environmental protection into the different stages of the operations, the different stages of execution of the project, if it involves maybe energy access projects and all of that. And that would go a long way to help address the conflict, where you're carrying out economic development, or you're carrying out the development of economic resources for economic growth, and at the same time also striving to protect the environment.
Okay.
Okay. Can I jump in and ask about the evolution of your own thinking, about energy justice, from your first encounters with this idea of energy justice, and how much you have tried to own this concept in view of your own experiences, both personal but also academic. I mean, do you see any changes in how you understand and relate and apply this concept? And I mean, you can use your current work as a frame for that, or indeed just how you think of yourself as an environmentalist. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Okay, for me, in my current research and the whole application of the energy justice concept and framework, is I have started out with understanding the problems that the jurisdiction that I'm looking at or working on, they face in terms of the justice issues that exist in their energy system. So for instance, I am currently looking at Nigeria and trying to find ways to see how the energy justice concept and the framework and the principles that are derived from it, how they could be applied to the energy systems in Nigeria to address justice problems that that exist in energy system. So one of the things I've done, in order to give my own interpretation of the energy justice concept for my work, is to first understand the nature of the energy problems that Nigeria face, how justice issues contribute to some of these problems. And that would help me, or that has helped me, because I'm done with that particular chapter where I have looked at the theoretical framework of the whole concept. And that has helped me in so many ways to be able to frame the nature of the energy justice concept that I want to use to analyze these problems in Nigeria. Because there is a danger of trying to rely so much, and that's one thing that Prof has told me about, relying so much on the theory, the way it has been framed by Western scholars, because there are the problems that they face, the energy problems that they face are, significantly different from what countries in the global south they face. For example, in Nigeria, you cannot be talking about issues that has to do with affordability in Nigeria when you have not even provided the energy. There is not enough energy before you start talking about affordability. So if you're talking about affordability, you might want to focus on countries in the global north, and then you're coming down to the global south, then you should be starting the discussions from issues that have to do with access, providing more access or more availability of energy. So for me, it has always been understanding the basis, understanding the nature of the problems in Nigeria that are underpinned by justice concern, in order for me to be able to frame the concept of energy justice that I am using for my current research.
Can I press you a little bit more on this point? Right? Okay, all right. So I'm quite familiar with your work, and I see there this emphasis on some of these what we will term Rosian concepts of justice. Okay, I see elements of that as a building block for how you understand justice, and then later on incorporating some of the more current ideas of energy justice. So there's a progression there in terms of how you have built your theoretical understanding of this. But I've often wondered whether the starting point is actually not the right place, because there are many African, many Nigerian scholars that have looked at the idea of justice from a more indigenous, more African basis. And I would like to ask what you think of this scholarship, and whether it changes or transposes the trajectory of your work. So more grounded understanding of justice in the Nigerian context, forming the basis, the framework of your critique as applied to energy justice.
Absolutely, Prof. I think it does. Understanding the concept of justice within the context of Nigeria, it's important for me in my work, because that would help me address or answer the questions, the research questions that I have raised, because of obviously, as you know, it's more of a case study of Nigeria. So where I'm able to understand and look at some of these works that have been done by the scholars, as you've mentioned, in Nigeria, in terms of how they have approached the concept of justice in Nigeria, would really help in going a long way to help answer the research questions that I have raised in my work. And more importantly, it will help in what I intend to use the whole concept of energy justice to address the energy crisis problems in Nigeria. So I totally agree with you that these works are important, or that I should dive deep into these areas to help situate the justice concept from a Nigerian point of view in my own work.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I will make a shortcut here, because we have planned for now the lunch break, but I see that there's still much interest. So as we will leave the Zoom call open anyways, I would give everyone the opportunity to already start their lunch break, but also to stay here and ask further questions. If Godswill is willing to also stay a bit longer and answer. And yeah, because then I think Javi will convene and Toko still has another open question maybe for thereafter.
Okay, all right. That's fine. What time are we starting again after this?
I am. Exactly. We'll reconvene at 1:10. I will also write that in the chat. And yeah, for now, I wish everyone else a good lunch break.
Okay. All right. I see that a lot of your research network is in the call, Godswill. Yeah. And none of them want to ask you a difficult question, and that is perfectly okay. But I just want to commend some of your colleagues for joining and supporting you. It's really important as young and upcoming researchers to be able to coordinate and continue conversations in this way. These are the journeys that all of you will be making together well into the future, and so it's nice to see this. On the question that I asked you about the place of African philosophy, African concepts of justice in the work that you're doing, I think works like the ones that you're doing now are the perfect opportunity to start to emphasize some of these ideas of what is just, what is environmental justice, but from the perspective of African philosophy and that, and there's a whole list of things that we can do, and I'm glad to see that you are doing some of this, because the conclusions that you reach once you start doing that are quite fundamentally different in terms of the recommendations that you would make. Yes, energy justice, as we know, it's a movement, and we can see some of its leading proponents have, I've got this Western tradition in philosophy and all of that. I'm not saying that you challenge that, but I'm saying that you complement that by grounding the work that you do with these African critiques, which are in and of themselves a valid basis for locating justice conversations. Okay, very good, very good.
Karen has a different view.
Who has?
I mean, Karen.
Oh yeah, of course. But this is to be expected because she comes from this other tradition. As lawyers, particularly human rights lawyers or environmental lawyers, I think the ability to speak in different tongues is quite important. But just as it is normal, learning to speak a different language and to do so fluently and all that takes time, and it requires investment, a belief that there's value in being able to speak all these different languages and all of that. And it's the same with the law. And this is to be excused. Just because someone can only do contracts, it doesn't mean that they're less of a lawyer. They're focused on contracts. But if you can do contracts and human rights and all of that, I think this is also important. Yeah.
Okay. I see that Javi's hand is still up, and also that Atta pulled up their hand.
Okay, sorry. I have only the speaker view, so I didn't see. Okay, please.
Yeah, if you would like to pose your question, Javi.
I think my question has been partly answered. Professor Kaime and Godswill as well, but because I'm not familiar with his work, and I feel a little bit left out. And I'm glad that now you're actually talking about your PhD thesis, and I'm actually really interested about that. And from a researcher's point of view, I'm so much interested. Whenever I come across somebody doing a PhD, I'm usually interested in what exactly is their problem. So that's where I start from. And of course, I've heard you talking about energy, accessibility, affordability, justice. And those I could say are the words that have captured my attention. But then I still don't understand what exactly is your PhD thesis about. And I'm sure there could be others who are not familiar with your work and would still want to understand. So could you briefly explain your research problem? Of course, I've noted that you've explained the theories and the laws involved, but what exactly is your research problem? Yeah, thanks.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. As expected, I mean, I knew Prof was going to bring in my research area in this presentation, so it is a good thing that I did prepare for that as well. So apart from environmental law, you know, my current research and my PhD research, it's on energy justice, a concept that basically, I mean, a simple way to describe it is, you know, the application of human rights to existing energy systems, from production to consumption and to the end users, how justice can be reflected in the operations of those systems. Justice being that trying to provide access to energy to people who need it, trying to provide you know, more energy that should be affordable to people who need it, trying to ensure that, you know, issues that has to do with due process are reflected in energy systems, trying to ensure that, you know, energy systems are more transparent and there is a good level of accountability. So I'm using the whole concept of trying to apply human rights to all of the energy to energy systems, and how that can be used to address the problems, energy problems that we face in my home country, Nigeria. So that's, in a summary, that is what my research about. And the research question has been, you know, or is, to what extent can the concept of energy justice and the principles derived from it can be, you know, how, to what extent can it be deployed to address energy problems that are underpinned by justice concerns in Nigeria? So I don't know if that makes sense.
Thank you. I also see that Atta's hand is up. Atta, if it's possible, you could also switch on your video.
I'm very sorry about the video. I am in the place where I'm in a place where it's a bit difficult for me. But okay. Yeah, I want to thank you and Professor Kaime as well for excellent presentations. And my very first time seeing Professor Kaime, I've heard so much about him from my colleague. So thank you so much to be a part of this. Coming from the justice perspective, Will and I are quite doing something a bit similar around justice, but mine is quite different. I mean, looking into water justice. So just to ask with regards to your research as to how, because when we look at justice, we find what other theorists have also talked about justice. They often come from a standpoint of their experiences as well, in terms of how their theories develop. And they're speaking from the Nigerian perspective. We'd like to know what are the injustices per se in terms of in Nigeria. What injustices do Nigerians face with regards to that are the underlying causes to, you know, the energy problem in Nigeria. You know, we also have this issue of minority and majority as well in the country, mostly drawn along the ethnic lines as well. Do you think all those play, you know, into this concept that you're trying to build with regards to energy justice in Nigeria?
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Etta, and for that particular question. It's really an interesting question. So one of the two, injustices that I would raise, just to answer the questions, or I should start from the principles that are embedded in the energy justice framework and the concept as well. So in understanding some of these injustices that exist in Nigeria's energy systems, I think the basis would be to look at how our energy systems are framed, how the operation of our energy systems currently. So you have, for instance, issues that has to do with due process, lack of due process in the operations of the energy systems in Nigeria that leads to factors that sort of exacerbate the energy crisis in Nigeria. You also have issues that has to do with transparency and accountability in the energy systems that leads to factors that exacerbate the energy crisis in Nigeria. There's also the issue of the way the burdens and benefits of that we get from energy systems are shared in Nigeria. So for instance, you look at what is going on in the Niger Delta region of Nigeria, where they provide more of the energy that we use in Nigeria. And then you have the issues of environmental degradation and environmental crisis that's going on there. So you could see that there is some sort of huge disparity in terms of how energy burdens and benefits are shared in Nigeria. Those are some of the injustices that exist within the system. And my question, what I'm trying to do with my research is how, putting all of these principles together, how it can be interpreted in a way that addresses these injustices in Nigeria's energy systems. Okay.
Okay. I hope that answered the question for Etta, because I still see your hand up. But otherwise, Chitsi got a question.
Okay. Thank you very much. So Godswill, I really enjoyed your presentation, not least because it's something that I'm also considering as part of my own PhD research. I wanted to make a comment and also ask my question from what Professor kindly talked about, the conceptions of justice that are rooted in an African consciousness. So I do sympathize with you, Godswill, because out there, when it comes to justice, the predominant theories are Western based. Okay, so we're talking about theories of, said by John Rawls, Amartya Sen. No matter how good these theories are, they are still steeped in a Western tradition. And I think it was part of the challenges I faced when I was looking for a normative theory to underpin my own conception of energy justice. But I just wanted to find out if at some point in time in your research, you would bring in some of these African theories as a critique of sorts, as a critique of sorts against Western-based conceptions of justice. So if you're looking at African theories, a lot of them have African communitarianism, for instance, which is basically elevating communal interest as against individual interest. Okay, and if you get to look at the issue of human rights, especially when you're talking of energy justice for a community of a group of persons, you get to find out that the African communitarian ethic is an attractive justice concept. So do you see yourself at some point in time bringing in those non-Western based theories of justice as a possible critique of existing Western based theories?
All right. Thank you very much, Chizzy. I totally agree with you. I'm going to agree with you that it's important to, first of all, look at some of these other theories, that sort of relates to the African context. And I would say that in my own research, I haven't actually pointed out specifically to some of these theories that you've raised, but I have done some bit of critique of the Western theories of the concept of justice. And my starting point has always been, like I did mention, to understand the nature of the problems that I'm trying to solve, or the nature of the problem that I'm preferring solution to, and that is where I've always approached the justice theory that within the Nigerian context or within the African context, understanding the nature of the problems, and then framing out the justice theory that should apply in addressing those problems. So for me, these are theories that are quite important in order to critique and not just to accept the Western theories or theorization of energy justice and even the whole concept of justice, because it helps to at that point bring in our voice to the research of coming up with theories that are suitable for our own claims and jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you. I'm the new moderator. Javi, is this a new question, or is it still on but you don't have a question?
It's still on, but I don't have a question.
Okay, then I would say thank you very much, Godswill, for your presentation. And yeah, it was really an honor to have you. Yeah, and we all take a break, I guess.